Atal, seated on an ivory dais in a festooned shrine at the top of the temple, was fully 3 centuries old, but still very keen of mind and memory. From him, Carter learned many things about the gods, mainly that they are indeed only Earth's gods, ruling feebly on our own dreamland and having no power or habitation elsewhere. They might, Atal said, heed a man's prayer if in good humor, but one must not think of climbing to their onyx stronghold atop Kadath in the old cold waste. It was lucky that no man knew where Kadath towers, for the fruits of it ascending it will be very grave. Atal's companion, Barzai the Wise, had been drawn screaming into the sky, for climbing merely the known peak of Hatheg Kla. With unknown Kadath, if ever found, matters would be much worse. For although Earth's gods may sometimes be surpassed by a wise mortal, they are protected by the other gods from the outside, whom is better not to discuss. At least twice in the world's history by the other gods set their seal upon Earth's primal granite, once in antediluvian times, as guessed from a drawing in those parts of the Akkadic manuscripts too ancient to be read, and once on Theg Kla, when Barzai the Wise tried to see Earth's gods dancing by the moonlight. So Atal said it would be much better to let all gods alone except in tactful prayers. Carter, though disappointed by Atal's discouraging advice and by meager help to be found in the Akkadic manuscripts in the 7 cryptic books of Hassan, did not wholly despair. First he questioned the old priest about that marvelous sunset city seen from the railed terrace, thinking that perhaps he might find it without the god's aid, but Atal could tell him nothing. Probably, Atal said, that the place belonged to a special dream world and not to the general land of vision that many know. It's conceivably that it might be on another planet. In any case, Earth's gods could not guide him if they would. But this was not likely, since the stopping of the dreams showed pretty clearly that it was something the great ones wished to hide from him. And Carter did a wicked thing, offering his guileless host so many draughts of the moon wine which the Zeus had given him that the old man became irresponsibly talkative. Robbed of his reserve, poor Atal babbled freely of forbidden things, telling of a grave image reported by travelers of carved on the solid rock of the mountain Negranic, on the island of Oriab in the southern sea, and hinting that it may be likeness which Earth gods once wrought of their own features in the days which danced by moonlight on that mountain. Then he hiccuped likewise that the features of that image were very strange, so that one might easily recognize them and that they are signs of authentic race of the gods. Now, the full use of all this and finding the gods became at once apparent to Carter. It is known that in disguise the younger ones among the great ones often espouse the daughters of men, so that around the borders of the cold waste wherein stands Kadath, the peasants must all bear their blood. This being so, the way to find that waste must be to see the stone face on the granite, and mark the features, then, having noted them with care, to search for the features, such features as among living men. Where they are plainest and thickest, there must the gods dwell nearest. And whatever stony waste lies back in the villages, in that place must that wherein stands Kadath. Much of the great ones might be learned in such regions, and those with whom blood might inherit little memories very useful to a seeker. They might not know their parentage, for the gods so dislike to be known among men that none can be found who's seen their faces wittingly. A thing which Carter realized not even he sought to scale Kadath, but that they would have queer, lofty thoughts misunderstood by their fellows, and would sing of far places and gardens, so unlike any known even in dreamland. That the common folk would call them fools. And from all this one could perhaps learn old secrets of Kadath, or gain hints of the marvelous sunset city which the gods held secret. And more, one might in certain cases seize some well-loved child of a god or as hostage, or even capture some young god himself, disguised and dwelling among men with a comely peasant maiden as his bride. Atal, however, did not know how to find Negranic on its island of Oriab, and recommended that Carl follow the sane sky under its bridges down to the southern sea, where no Burgess of Ulthar has ever been seen, but whence the merchants come in boats with long caravans of mule and two-wheeled carts. There's a great city there, Dilath Lean, but in Ulthar its reputation is bad because of the black three-banked galleys that sailed to it with the rubies from no clear name shore. Traders that come from these galleys to deal with the jewelers are human, or nearly so, but the rowers are never beheld. And it is not thought wholesome in Ulthar that merchants should trade with black ships from unknown places whose rowers cannot be exhibited. By the time he had given this information, Atal was very drowsy, and Carter laid him gently on the couch of inlaid ebony and gathered his long beard decorously on his chest. As he turned to go, he observed that no suppressed flutter followed him, and wondered why the Zooks had become so lax in their curious pursuit. They noticed all the sleek, complacent cats of Ulthar licking their chops with unusual gusto, and recalled the spitting and caterwauling that he had heard in lower parts of the temple while absorbed in the old priest's conversation. He recalled, too, that the evilly hungry way in which an especially impudent young Zoog had regarded a small black kitten in the cobbled street outside. And because he loved nothing on earth more than small black kittens, he stooped and petted the sleek black cats of Ulthar as they licked their chops. And not mourn them, though, because those inquisitive Zoogs would escort him no farther. It was sunset now, so Carter stopped at an ancient inn on a steep little street overlooking the little lower town. And as he went over to the balcony of his room and gazed down at the sea of red-tiled roofs and cobbled ways in the pleasant fields beyond, all mellow and magical in the slanted light, he swore that Ulthar would be a very likely place to dwell in always, and were it not the memory of a greater sunset city ever goading him on toward perils. Then twilight fell, and the pink walls of the plastered gables turned violet and mystic, and little yellow lights floated up one by one from the old lattice windows. And sweet bells pealed in the temple tower above, and its first star winked softly above the meadows across the sky. With the night came song, and Carter nodded as the lutenist praised ancient days from beyond the filigree balconies and tessellated courts of simple Ulthar. And there might have been sweetness even in the voices of Ulthar's many cats, but they were mostly heavy and silent from strange feasting. Some of them stole off to those cryptal realms which are only known to cats, and which villagers say are the moon's dark side, whether cats leap from tall housetops. But one small black kitten crept upstairs and sprang in Carter's lap to purr and play, and curled up near his feet when he lay down at last in this little couch whose pillows were stuffed with fragrant, drowsy herbs. In the morning, Carter joined a caravan of merchants bound for Dilathine, with the spun wool of Ulthar and cabbages of Ulthar's busy farms. And for 6 days they rode with twinkling bells on a smooth road beside the sky, stopping for some nights at the inns of little quaint fishing towns, and on other nights camping there under the stars while snatches of boatsmen's songs came from placid river. The country is very beautiful, with green hedges and groves and picturesque peaked cottages and octagonal windmills. On the seventh day, a blur of smoke arose on the horizon ahead, and then the tall black tower of Dilathine, which is built mostly from basalt. Dilathine, with its thin angular tower, looks in the distance like a bit of the Giant's Causeway, and its streets are dark and uninviting. There are many dismal sea taverns near the myriad wharves, and all the town is thronged with the strange seamen of every land on earth, but few of which are said not to be earth. Carter questioned the oddly robed men of that city about the peak of Negranic on the Isle of Oriab, and they found that they knew of it well. Ships came from Baharna on the island, one being due to return thither only a month. And Negranic is but 2 days' zebra ride from that port. But few had seen the stone face of the god, because it is on a very difficult side of Negranic, which overlooks only sheer crags and a valley of sinister lava. Once the gods were angered with men on that side and spoke of the matter to the other gods. It was hard to get this information from the traders and sailors in Dilathine sea taverns, but because they mostly preferred the whisper of the black galleys. One of them was due in a week with rubies from the unknown shore, and the townsfolk dreaded to see it dock. The mouths of these men who came from it to trade were too wide, and the way their taverns were humped up and 2 points above their foreheads were in especially bad taste, and their shoes were the shortest and queerest ever seen in the 6 kingdoms. The worst of all was the matter of the unseen rowers. Those banks of oars moved too briskly and accurately and vigorously to be comfortable. And it was not right for a ship to stay in port for weeks while the merchants traded, yet to give no glimpse of its crew. It was not fair to the tavern keepers of Dilathine, or to the grocers or butchers either, for not a scrap of provisions was ever sent aboard. The merchants took only gold and stout black slaves from Parg across the river. That was all they ever took. Those unpleasantly featured merchants and their unseen rowers. Never anything from the butchers and grocers, but only gold and the fat black men of Parg, whom they bought by the pound. And the odors from these galleys, which the south wind blew in from the wharves, are not to be described. Only by constant smoking strong thagweed could even the hardiest denizen of the old sea taverns bear them. Kadath would never have tolerated the black galleys had such rubies had been attainable elsewhere. But no mine in all Earth's dreamland was known to produce their like. Of these things Kadath's cosmopolitan folk chiefly gossiped while Carter waited patiently for the ship from Bahama, which might bear him to the Isle whereon carven the granite towers lofty and barren. Meanwhile, he did not fail to seek through the haunts of far travelers for any tales that they might have concerning Kadath and the cold waste, or a marvelous city of marble walls and silver fountains seen below terraces in the sunset. Of these things, however, he learned nothing, though he once thought that a certain old slant-eyed merchant looked queerly intelligent when the old waste was spoken of. This man was reported to trade with the horrible stone villages on the icy desert plateau of Lang, which no healthy folk visit and whose evil fires are seen at night from afar. He was even rumored to have dealt with a high priest not to be described, which wears a yellow silken mask over its face and dwells all alone in a prehistoric stone mason monastery. That such a person might have nibbled in traffic with such beings as may conceivably dwell in the cold waste was not to be doubted, but Carter soon found there was no use questioning him. Then the black galley slipped into the harbor past the basalt mole and saw a lighthouse, silent and alien, and with a strange stench to the southwest drove into town. Uneasiness rustled through the caverns along that waterfront, and after a while the dark, wide-mouthed merchants with humped turbans and short feet clumped stealthily ashore to seek the bazaars of the jewelers. Carter observed them closely and disliked them more the longer he looked at them. Then he saw them drive the stout black men of Park up the gangplank, grunting and sweating in the singular galley, and wondering what lands, if any lands at all, those pathetic creatures might be destined to serve. And on the third evening of the galley's stay, one of the most uncomfortable merchants spoke to him, smirking sinfully and hinting of what he had heard in the taverns of Carter's quest. He appeared to have knowledge of too secret for public telling, and though the sound of his voice was unbearably hateful, Carter felt that the lure of so far a traveler must not be overlooked. He bade him, therefore, to be his own guest in locked chambers above, and drew out the last of the Zoog's moon wine to loosen his tongue. The strange merchant drank heavily, but smirked unchanged by the draught. Then he drew forth a curious bottle of wine of his own, and Carter saw that the bottle was a singular hollowed ruby, grotesquely carved in patterns too fabulous to be comprehended. He offered his wine to his host, and though Carter took only the least sip, he felt the dizziness of space and the fever of unimagined jungles. All the while the guest had been smiling more and more broadly, and as Carter slipped into blankness, the last thing he saw was that dark, odious face convulsed with evil laughter. Something quite unspeakable about one of the two frontal puffs of the orange turban and become disarranged with the shakings of that epileptic mirth. Carter next had consciousness amid horrible odors beneath the tent-like awning on the deck of a ship, with the marvelous coast of the southern sea flying by in unnatural swiftness. He was not chained, but three of the dark, sardonic merchants stood grinning nearby, and the sight of those humps in their turbans made him almost faint. As to the stench that filtered up through the sinister hatches. He saw slip past the glorious lands and cities of which a fellow dreamed of Earth. A lighthouse keeper in ancient Kingsport had often discoursed in the old days and recognized the temple terraces of Zar, abode of forgotten dreams, the spires of infamous Therorion, that demon city with 1,000 wonders where the Eidolon Lethi reigns, the charnel gardens of Zura, land of pleasures unattained, and the twin headlands of crystal meeting above in the resplendent arch which guard the harbor of Sonali Nile, blessed land of fancy. Past all these gorgeous lands of the Maladori's ship flew unwholesomely, urged by the abnormal strokes of these unseen rowers below. And before the day was done, Carter saw that the steersman could have no other goal than the basalt pillars of the west, beyond which simple folk say splendid Cathuria lies, but which wise dreamers well know as the gates of a monstrous cataract which the oceans of Earth's dreamlands drop wholly to abysmal nothingness, and shoot through the empty spaces toward other worlds and other stars and the awful voids outside the ordered universe where the demon sultan Azathoth gnaws hungrily in chaos amid pounding and piping and the hellish dancing of the other gods, blind, voiceless, tenebrous, and mindless, with their soul and messenger Nyarlathotep. Meanwhile, the three Sartonic merchants would give no word of their intent, though Carter knew well that they must be leagued with those who wished him hold him from his quest. It is understood in the land of the dream that the other gods must have had many agents moving among them, men, and all these agents, whether wholly human or slightly less than human, are eagerly to work the will of these blind and mindless things in return for the favor of their hideous soul and messenger, the crawling chaos Nyarlathotep. So Carter inferred that the merchants were of the humped turbans, hearing of his daring search for the great ones in their castle in Kadath, had decided to take him away and deliver him to Nyarlathotep for whatever nameless bounty might be offered for such a prize. What might be the land of these merchants in our known universe, or in the eldritch spaces outside, Carter could not guess. Nor could he imagine at what hellish trysting place they would meet the crawling chaos to give him up and claim their reward. He knew, however, that no beings as nearly human as these would dare approach in the ultimate knighted throne of the demon Azathoth in the formless central void. At the set of the sun, the merchants licked their excessively wide lips and glared hungrily, and one of them went below and returned from some hidden and unoffensive cabin with a pot and basket of plates. Then they squatted close together beneath the awning and ate the smoking meat that was passed around. But when they gave Carter a portion, he found something very terrible in the size and shape of it, so that he turned even paler than before and cast that portion into the sea where no eye was on him. And again he thought of those unseen rowers beneath, and of the suspicious nourishment from which their far too mechanical strength was derived. It was dark when the galley passed betwixt the basalt pillars of the west, and the sound of the ultimate cataract swelled portentous from ahead, and the spray of that cataract rose to obscure the stars, and the deck grew damp, and the vessel reeled in the surging current of the brink. Then with a queer whistle wind plunge, the leap was taken, and Carter felt the terrors of the nightmare as Earth fell away and the great boat shot silent in the comet light into planetary space. Never before had he known what shapeless black things lurk and caper and flounder off to the ether, leering and grinning at such voyagers as may pass. Sometimes feeling about with slimy paws when some moving object excites their curiosity. These are the nameless larvae of the other gods, and like them are blind and without mind, and possessed of singular hungers and thirsts. But that offensive galley did not aim as far as Carter had feared, for it soon saw the helmsman was steering a course directly for the moon. The moon was a crescent, shining larger and larger as they approached it, showing singular craters and peaks uncomfortably. The ship made for its edge, and it soon became clear that its destination was secret and mysterious side, which is always turned away from the earth, and which no fully human person, save perhaps the dreamer Sneerith-Co, has ever beheld. The close aspect of the moon as the galley drew near proved very disturbing to Carter, and he did not like the size and the shape of the ruins which crumbled here and there. The dead temples in the mountains were so placed that they could have glorified no wholesome or suitable gods, and the symmetries of the broken column there seemed to lurk in some dark and inner meaning, which did not invite solution. And what the structure and proportions of the old worshippers could have been, Carter steadily refused to conjecture. When the ship rounded the edge and sailed over the lands unseen by man, there appeared in the queer landscape certain signs of life, and Carter saw many low, broad, round cottages and fields of grotesque white as fungi. He noticed that the cottages had no windows, and thought that their shape suggested the huts of Eskimo. Then he glimpsed the oily waves of the sluggish sea and knew that the voyage was once more to be by water, or at least through some liquid. The galley struck the surface with a peculiar sound, and the oddly elastic way the waves received it was very perplexing to Carter. They now slid along at great speed, once passing and hailing another galley of kindred form, but generally seeing nothing but that curious sea and a sky that was black and star-strewn, even though the sun shone scorchingly in it. There presently arose along ahead the jagged hills of a leprous-looking coast, and Carter saw the thick, unpleasant gray towers of the city. The way they leaned and bent, the manner in which they were clustered, and the fact that they had no windows at all was very disturbing to the prisoner. And he bitterly mourned the folly which had made him sip up the curious wine of that merchant with the humped turban. As the coast drew nearer, the hideous stench of the city grew stronger. He saw upon the jagged hills many forests, some of whose trees he recognized as akin to that solitary moon tree in the enchanted wood of the earth, from whose sap the small brown zooks ferment their peculiar wine. Carter could now distinguish moving figures on the noisome wharves ahead, and the better he saw them, the worse he began to fear and detest them. For they were not men at all, or even approximately men, but grayish, white, slippery things which could expand and contract at will, and whose principal shape, though it often changed, was that of a sort of toad without any eyes, but with a curiously vibrating mass of short pink tentacles on the end of its blunt, vague snout. These objects were waddling busily around the wharves, moving bales and crates and boxes with preternatural strength, and now and then hopping off on or off some anchored galley with long oars in their forepaws. And now and then one would appear driving in a herd of clumping slaves, which now indeed were approximate human beings with wide mouths like those merchants who traded in dilathline. Only these herds, being without turbans or shoes or clothing, did not seem so very human after all. Some of these slaves, the fatter ones, whom a sort of overseer would pinch experimentally, were unloaded from ships and nailed in crates which workers pushed into low warehouses or loaded on the great lumbering vans. Once a van was hitched up and driven off, and the fabulous thing which drew it was such as Carr gasped. Even after having seen the other monstrosities of that hateful place, now and then a small herd of slaves dressed as turbaned like the dark merchants would be driven on board a galley, followed by a great crew of the slippery gray toad things as officers, navigators, and rowers. And Carter saw that the almost human creatures were reserved for the more ignominious kinds of servitude which required no strength, such as steering and cooking, fetching and carrying, and bargaining with men on the earth or other planets which they traded. These creatures must have been conveniently on Earth, for they were truly not unlike men when dressed and carefully shod and turbaned, and could haggle in the shops of men without embarrassment or curious explanations. But most of them, unless lean and ill-favored, were unclothed and packed in crates and drawn off in lumbering lorries by fabulous things. Occasionally other beings were unloaded and uncrated, and some very like these semi-humans. Some not so similar, some not similar at all. And he wondered if any of the poor, stout black men of the park were left to be unloaded and crated and shipped inland in those obnoxious drays. When the galleys landed in a greasy-looking clay of spongy rock, and a nightmare horde of toad things wriggled out of the hatches, and two of them seized Carter and dragged him ashore. The smell and aspect of this city are beyond telling, and Carter had only scattering images of tiled street and black doorways and endless precipices of gray vertical walls without windows. At length he was dragged within a low doorway and made to climb infinite steps in pitch blackness. It was apparently all one to the toad things whether it was light or dark. The odor of the place was intolerable, and when Carter was locked in a chamber and left alone, he was scarcely had strength to crawl around and ascertain its form and dimensions. It was circular and about 20 feet across. From then on, time seemed to exist. At intervals, food was pushed in, but Carter would not touch it. What his fate would be, he did not know, but he felt that he was for the coming of that frightful soul a messenger of infinity's other gods. The crawling chaos in Nyarlathotep. Finally, after an unguessed span of hours or days, the great stone door swung wide open again, and Carter was shoved down the stairs and out into the red-lit streets of that fearsome city. It was night on the moon, and all through the town were stationed slaves bearing torches. In a detestable square, a sort of procession was formed. 10 of those toad things and 24 almost human torchbearers, 11 on either side, and one before and behind. Carter was placed in the middle of the line. 5 toad things ahead and 5 behind, and one almost human torchbearer on each side of him. Certain of those toad things produced disgustingly carven flutes of ivory and made loathsome sounds. To that hellish piping, the column advanced out of the tiled streets and into the nighted plains of obscene fungi, soon commencing to climb one of the lower and more gradual hills that lay behind the city. That on some frightful slope of blasphemous plateau, the crawling chaos waited. Carter could not doubt, and he wished that the suspense might soon be over. The whining of those impious flutes was shocking, and he would have given worlds for even some half-normal sound. But these toad things had no voices, and the slaves did not talk. Then through the star-speckled darkness, there did come a normal sound. It rolled from the higher hills and from the jagged peaks around it, caught up and echoed in swelling pandemonic chorus. It was the midnight yell of the cat. And Carter knew it well at last that the old village folk were right, and they made low guesses about the cryptical realms which are known only to cats, and to which the elders among cats repair stealth nocturnally, springing from high housetops. Verily, it is to the moon's dark side that they go to leap and gamble on the hills that converse with ancient shadows. And here, amid the columns of folded things, Carter heard their homely, friendly cry, and thought of the steep roofs and warm hearths and little lighted windows of home. Now much of the speech of cats was known to Randolph Carter, and in this far terrible place he uttered the cry that was suitable. But he need not have done, for even had his lips opened, he heard the chorus wax and draw near, and saw swift shadows against the stars, as small graceful shapes leaped from hill to hill, and gathering legions. The call of the clan had been given, and before the foul procession even had time to be frightened, a cloud of smothering fur and phalanx of murderous claws were tidily and contemptuously upon it. The flute stopped, and there were shrieks in the night, dying, almost human, screamed, and the cat spit and yowled and roared, but the toad things never made a sound, as their stinking green ichor oozed fatally upon the porous earth with the obscene fungi. It was a stupendous sight while the torches lasted, and Carter never before had seen so many cats, black, gray, white, yellow, tiger, and mixed, common, Persian, and Manx, Tibetan, Angora, and Egyptian. All were there in the fury of battle, and there hovered over them some trace of that profound and inviolate sanctity which made their goddess great in the temples of Bubastis. They would leap 7 strong at the throat of almost human or the pink tentacled snout of a toad thing and drag it down savagely to the fungus plain, where myriads of their fellows would surge over it and into it with the frenzied claws and teeth of a divine battle fury. Carter had seized a torch from the stricken slave, but was soon overborne by the surging waves of its loyal defenders. Then he lay in the utter blackness, hearing this clangor of war and the shouts of victors, and feeling the soft paws of his friends as they rushed to and fro over him in the fray. At last, all in exhaustion, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, it was upon a strange scene. The great shining disk of earth, 13 times greater than that of the moon as we see it, had risen with floods of weird light over the lunar landscape, and across all those leagues of wild plateau and ragged crest there squatted one endless sea of cats in orderly array. Circle in circle they reached, and 2 or 3 leaders out of the ranks were licking his face and purring to him consolingly. Of the dead slaves and toad things there were not many signs, but Carter thought he saw one bone a little way off in the open space between him and the beginning of the solid circles of the warriors. Carter now spoke with the leaders in the soft language of the cats and learned that the ancient friendship of the species was well known and often spoken of in the places where cats congregate. He had not been unmarked in Othar when he passed through, and sleek old cats had remembered how he petted them after they had attended to hungry zoogs that looked evilly at a small black kitten. And they recalled, too, how he had welcomed the very little kitten who came to see him in the inn, and how he had given it a saucer of rich cream in the morning before he left. The grandfather of that very little kitten was the leader of the army now assembled, for he had seen the evil procession from a far hill, and recognized the prisoner as a sworn friend on his kind of earth, in the land of the dream.